Hello everyone. I have here my site plan and conceptual site plan. For you, these are going to be your traced original copies of these. I have a printout just for review. I also have all the tools that you're going to be needing in order to complete this assignment. You'll probably need both of your triangles. I'll move those out of the way now, as well as your pencils. You'll be using your mechanical pencils for your finalized drawing for your site plan. You can use your 6B or one of your thicker pencils here to do your practice sketch. Always have an eraser with you because it's good to have. Drafting dots to tape your information down. An erasing shield for any fine erasing that you need to do. And then your engineering scale for 1 inch equals 10 feet. So the first steps here is I have my original site plan here on this side, and I've actually put a piece of trace paper over the top of it so that way I could have a practice sketch going and I can start to work out some of the logistics of my site plan without really messing up or having to do it directly on my site plan trace paper. So some of the key items I want to start with here. One is determining your building location in elevation. So what is the topography line that it hits and how deep is it into the ground? Also, we want to start to establish the lines that are going to exist to define zones in the front yard as well as in the backyard. So we're going to kind of go through the entire site here and start to establish and break down where zones are. So I'm going to go ahead and start by figuring out what is the building height. And again, this is all on a piece of trace paper, so I can kind of write and sketch over the top of it. This is going to be my roadmap to my actual site plan. This is how I can determine to get this resolved. So first things first is determining at what height your building is placed. I mentioned in the past that the building needs to be set at the lowest possible elevation, which means that this may be carved into the ground or lower than the actual ground around it, which is totally fine. As long as you have an entrance point, and you can carve out the ground around it and make steps down to it, that should be totally fine. So based off of this, the lowest elevational point is right about here, which is somewhere between 86 and 87 elevation. So I'm going to say that the entire building is set at 86, just to make sure that the entire building is definitely set down into the ground. So please take note of that somewhere. Just if you want to, you could just circle and highlight this 86, and that way you'll know. What that means is this portion of the building here is actually set at 86, and since it's somewhere around 88, that means that it's actually 2 feet lower than the actual ground right here. So if I have an entrance point here, which I most likely will based off of my conceptual site plan, I'm going to need to have a couple of steps that get me down. For every foot, you need to have 2 steps. All right, so if you're going down an elevation 1 foot, then you'll have 2 steps to get you there, and if you're going down an elevation of 2 feet, you'll have 4 steps that will get you there. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Here I'm just going to write 86 in nice and big so that way I know, and I can reference my area that I'm working on and determine how many steps and maybe a small wall that I might need. So now that I've determined that, I'd like to start defining the front yard. Here I've mentioned on my conceptual site plan that I have a parking space here and that my entrance leads that way. So that's some of the stuff that I need to determine right now. I would say that I'm going to have my entrance here, which is where my arrow is pointing to. And so I want to develop a front yard area, something like that, where I can have my entry, right? So I'll do something like this for now. And I'll start to get some measurements into this in a second. I'm going to define everything by the actual driveway. Now for a driveway, it needs to be at minimum 10 feet wide. So right there, I've placed my scale from 1 to 0, and that's 10 feet. But it's always nice to give yourself a little bit of extra there. So maybe I'll go to about 15 feet. And right there, I'm able to define 15 feet, and I can get my triangle in here and just very quickly locate where that's going to be, right? So now I've started to establish that area. Now something I want to do with this is actually bring it all the way down to the street curb. And right when it hits the sidewalk, you can actually kind of expand it outward using your 30-degree triangle. That will just allow people to understand that you have a curb cut that occurs there. And that's sort of that area in the sidewalk that goes up and down when you are walking on it. So the other sort of area that this driveway might occur is maybe I'll kind of pull it up just a little bit here, but at some point it's going to want to follow that angle, that 15-degree angle. So I will have it going up in this direction at some point, so that way it kind of expands out a bit. Now the next dimension to be aware of is the depth of your driveway. At minimum it should be 20 feet, so I put the 2 at the property line here, and that's 10-20 feet. Okay, you should definitely make sure that it's at least 20 feet deep. For the sake of this, I can establish it at about 20 feet. I'm actually going to do just a little bit more here, maybe about 22 feet, just so I have some wiggle room. And there it is right there. I've determined sort of that line, and now I've established also the area for the entry, right? And I'm just gonna kind of hard line that a little bit. And I carried it past the building just slightly because I always find that it's better to, rather than align directly with the building in areas, that if you just extend just past it, it allows for a little bit of overlap and it creates sort of a better design overall. I'm just going to establish this first area here. This driveway is going to be kind of cutting down, and I will need steps leading down that way. So I'm going to go ahead and establish maybe some steps that could possibly be right here. I think for the entry pad, you'd want about 8 feet or so. So this is just going to be like a flattened area right in front of the entrance, right? So maybe something like that. Now what I need to do is step down as I'm traveling in this direction. So if that's the case, I also will need a secondary platform here. And maybe that's also offset from the original one. So maybe it's something like this. And I'm kind of creating stepping down motion, right? So you can imagine you're stepping down, there's 6 inches, and you're stepping down, there's 1 foot. And so I'm starting to create these large pads that have these step down areas. Now, if I really want to just add one additional step to this, I can, right? So I can just say, okay, well, you step down once and you step down again, that's 1 foot. And you step down once, and if you step down again, now you're stepping down 2 feet. So now I'm starting to create the steps that I need for this. Now, obviously, you're probably going to have some kind of a wall right here, just to kind of define that space a little bit. So I'm just creating sort of a secondary line around it. And I can kind of just close it off probably about right here. So I've got my wall defined, and I'll probably need a wall on this other side as well, just to kind of hold back the land since this area is traveling downward. All right, so I defined my 2 sets of walls. I've got my steps leading down, which is good. And I've got my driveway located. So now I know that this whole area here is just gonna be landscaping, so there's not really much to deal with right now. I am, however, gonna say that we do need to have some trees here. So I'm gonna suggest that we probably need to add maybe 3 trees in this area. And again, this is just a rough sketch, right? We're not defining everything at this point, but you'll take this information and actually lift up this piece of trace paper, pull it to the side here, and then you'll be able to define and draw all these things technically with your circle templates, with your actual scales, and with your finer mechanical pencils. So now that we've got that established, we begin to define where the entrance is going to be and our driveway. The next thing that we can start to do here is work out our elevation. So I have there we go. So I had to set up my tools here to get my 15 degree. Again, the tools look like this in order to establish 15 degrees. It's always a trick trying to get this to work out properly, but once you have it, you'll see that it does a line here with the property line. That will allow me to work off of this edge and kind of offset off of it, right? So I can kind of move this like this and define anything that's at 15 degrees. At some point, my driveway is going to want to sort of extend upward here, so I'm just going to kind of do that now and say that's the direction that my driveway is going to go. In my conceptual site plan, I have this arrow that suggests a pathway to the pavilion. So I'm actually going to take this line all the way up until I hit that pavilion. Now again, we want about 5 feet here minimum. I'm going to go a little bit wider for a pathway. I would say somewhere between 3 and 5 feet is acceptable, but if you can go larger than that, it's also useful, right? So there are my 2 lines to get me to my pavilion, which is going to be up here. I might as well at this point sort of establish what that pavilion is going to be. I know it's going to take up this corner, so I'm just going to have it take up pretty much the full corner here. Depending on what angle it's at. I think that this is a decent angle. 45 seems pretty good here. So I'm going to kind of